All right, this video is going to go over how to graph sine and cosine functions. There's a lot that you need to know for this, but I kind of make a checklist each time I do these of 4 things: amplitude, period, scale factor, and midline. So basically what's going to happen is you're going to have a graph here, and it's going to look like a wave. And it's going to repeat over and over and over again. And so your amplitude is how high up or how low you go off of your midline, which is a line that runs smack dab through the middle of this thing. Now, I said it repeats over and over. Whenever it starts repeating, that's the period, however long it takes to start repeating. And basically, we're going to have the period, and we're going to break it up into 5 points. That's going to be called scale factor. So the period divided by 4 is going to give us our scale factor. I make this checklist every single time I do one of these. So let's go ahead and look at some examples. You're going to need to know what the parent function for each sine and cosine looks like based on positive or negative. Positive sine starts in the middle, will go high, come back to the middle, go low, and then come back to the middle like this. Negative sine starts in the middle, but instead of going up, now it goes down, comes back, goes up, and then comes back to the midline like this. Positive cosine starts high, goes midline, goes low, comes midline, and ends high like this. And negative cosine starts low, goes mid, goes high, goes mid, and goes low. So it would look like this. So keep that in mind when you're graphing all these. The first one is just sine theta. So in terms of my checklist, the amplitude, by default, sine theta, the amplitude is 1. The period, by default, is 2 pi. Which means your scale factor, when you divide that by 4, is 2 pi over 4 or pi over 2. And then there's also the midline. The midline by default on this is y equals 0. So let's look at what this looks like. Basically, I would put my midline down. It's right here on the x-axis. An amplitude of 1 means I'm going to go up 1, down 1, off of that midline. A period of 2 pi means I'm going to repeat after 2 pi. And so my scale factor of pi over 2 means I'm going to have 5 locations that are important, and they're all pi over 2 apart. So like pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, which is just pi, 3 pi over 2, and 4 pi over 2, which is 2 pi. And so now all I have to do is graph the actual line. Sine by default starts at 0, 0. It will go up to 1. It will come back to 0. It will drop to -1. And then it'll end at 0 when the period ends. So it looks like this. So doing the scale factor in the middle here, it makes it so easy because then you can just put dots and connect the dots. So let me show you cosine. Cosine by default has an amplitude of 1, period of 2 pi, a scale factor, divide 2 pi by 4, you get pi over 2, and a midline of y equals 0. All right, so it's kind of the same thing. I would draw my midline. I would do my amplitude. Here's 1. There's -1. The period is 2 pi. So scale factor, I'm going to have a point at 0, a point at pi over 2, at pi, at 3 pi over 2, and at 2 pi. All right, so cosine's parent function starts high, hits 0, goes low, hits 0, and goes high, and then repeats. So it would look something like, I can do better. It would look something like this. And then of course it would repeat. All right, now what's going to happen is they're going to apply some transformations to this, whether it's a stretch, whether it's a shift, that kind of thing. So let me show you how this works. The first number is your amplitude. So if because you're stretching it vertically, so this particular one, the amplitude is 2. The period is affected by a b value. There's not one here, so the period's 2 pi, which means my scale factor is 2 pi divided by 4, which is pi over 2. And then there's a number at the end. This is a vertical shift. This changes your midline. So my midline here is y equals 4. So let me show you how you do this. You first start with your midline, 4. From there, you're going to go up 2, down 2, because that's your amplitude. So I've got my midline here at 4. I'm going to have a period of 2 pi. So I'm going to go ahead and do my scale factor. All right. And now it's just a positive sine function. So you just follow that same pattern as the parent function. It starts at 0, it goes high, it goes back to 0, it goes low, and then it goes back to 0. And then you just connect the dots. And then of course it would repeat, but all right, let me show you another one. The first number is your amplitude. So this one, you can just call it 3. You don't have to call it -3. You're just saying it goes up 3, down 3 off of the midline. There's no b value. So that means my period is still 2 pi, which means my scale factor is still 2 pi divided by 4, which is pi over 2. And the last number is your midline. So this one would be y equals -5. So if I was doing this, I'd start at my midline of -5. Now from there, I'm going to go up or down 3. Now I plot my midline and I plot the period. And I'm going to go ahead and do scale factor. And now all I have to do is follow the same pattern for cosine, but this time it's negative. So it's not going to be like this parent function. When it's negative cosine, it starts low, hits midline, goes high, hits midline, and then goes low to finish. So this one would look something like this. And then it would repeat. Okay, next up, this first one, my amplitude is the first number, 2. The period, there's no b value, so that means period is still 2 pi. That means scale factor, divide that by 4, pi over 2. And also your midline is your last number. So that would be y equals -1. So I start at my midline. That's here. My amplitude, I'm going to go up 2 I know mine's not to scale. I don't really care about scale. So I went up 2, down 2 because of my amplitude to get those numbers. The period is 2 pi. I'm going to go ahead and do my scale factor. And now I just graph the sine function. So it's a positive sign. So it starts midline, goes up, then goes back to midline, then goes down, and then comes back to midline. Then connect the dots. And then it would repeat. Okay, now we're getting into some that are going to change the period. So let's look at this one. Your amplitude, there's no number in front. So it didn't get stretched at all. So your amplitude is 1 by default. Now the period. Your period is 2 pi divided by b. So that's 2 pi divided by 1/2, which is 4 pi. That's the new period. Which means your scale factor, you divide the period by 4, would just be pi. And your midline, there's no shift at the end, so it's just y equals 0. So let's look at what this one looks like. I've got my midline at 0, that's here. I've got an amplitude of 1, so I'm going to go up 1, down 1 off of that midline. I've got a period of 4 pi now, and my scale factor is different, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. It goes up by pi each amount. So it'd be pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. And now I can just graph the positive cosine function, which starts high, hits mid, goes low, hits mid, and goes high. So it would look like this. And then it would repeat. All right, we're getting there. This next one, my amplitude, there's no stretch or compress in front, so it's just 1 by default. The period is 2 pi divided by b, so 2/3 pi. The scale factor is this divided by 4, which would be 2 pi over 12, which is pi over 6. And the midline, there's no shift at the end, so it's still just y equals 0. Now, there's an important thing to understand about this scale factor. Let me go ahead and put this on the graph first. Hold on. I've got my midline at 0. I've got my amplitude up 1, down 1. I've got the final ending place for the period is 2 pi over 3. And I'm going to start at 0. So I'm going to be going up by pi over 6 for each of these green tick marks. So that's pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, which is pi over 3, 3 pi over 6, which is pi over 2, and then 4 pi over 6, which is 2 pi over 3. I'm reducing as I go there. So if you're wondering how I got these numbers and why they're not over 6s, I always reduce my fractions. And now I just graph the positive sine function. So it starts mid, goes high, goes mid, goes low, and then goes midline. So it would look like this. And then it would repeat. All right, then this last one is a more realistic question. There's a lot going on here. First of all, your amplitude is that number in front, -3. So we'll just call it 3. That just means you're going up 3 or down 3 off of your midline. The period is 2 pi divided by b. So that's 2 pi divided by 1/2, which is 4 pi. The scale factor is 4 pi divided by 4, which is just pi. And then your midline is the number at the end, the vertical shift, which is +2. All right, here we go. I'm going to have 2 as my midline. It's going to go up 3, down 3. So I can go ahead and put the midline on here. The period is 4 pi. Scale factor goes by pi's. So I'm going to have 0, pi, 2 pi, and 3 pi. And now I can just graph my negative cosine function, which starts low, goes mid, goes high, goes mid, and then goes low. Please be advised, all of these functions that you see here, they're the easier kind because none of them have what's called a phase shift, which would be like, it would look like sine of 2x minus pi over 3 or something. These are the ones you have to watch out for, and that's what I'm going to make this next video about. So this was just the basics. Okay, one more thing. I was looking over my notes and it turns out I do put the negative when I talk about amplitude. So if it's a negative number, like look at this fourth one, the amplitude would be -3. Down here, this last one, this amplitude would be -3. So if it's a negative number, you can put the amplitude as negative. Sorry for the confusion. Hope this video still helped.